I was told something unsettling about my son, doubted it, yet decided to watch him. The bakery case glowed under fluorescent lights, and the scent of sugar and warm bread was the only comforting thing in the whole store. I stood at the end of the checkout lane with a plain white cake box hugged to my chest, waiting for the total like it was going to decide whether my day would be gentle or cruel. My fingers kept finding the edge of my worn wallet, as if touching it could make the bills inside multiply. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. The cashier looked about my age, maybe a little older. His hair was thin and gray, his shoulders slightly hunched from years of standing in one place. At first he moved the way cashiers always do. Scanner beep, item slides down, hand reaches for the next thing. Nothing personal, nothing memorable. I remember thinking he looked like someone's uncle, the kind of man who'd tell a corny joke if the line got too long. Then my card declined. The machine chirped its polite refusal, the red letters shining like an accusation. I didn't gasp or make a scene. I'd already known it might happen. Pension deposits didn't stretch the way they used to, and the last refill of my medications had cost more than I wanted to admit. Still, embarrassment rose in my throat, hot and sharp. I smiled too quickly, the way people do when they're trying to show they're fine. "Oh, that's all right," I said and pulled out cash. I counted it once. Then again, slower, like I could double-check reality into kindness. That's when the man's eyes narrowed, not in annoyance, but in recognition. He leaned forward to see the name printed on the rejected card slip, and his expression shifted as if someone had opened a door in his head. He looked up at my face and held my gaze longer than a stranger should. "Ma'am," he said quietly, not calling the next customer, not reaching for the receipt paper. "Are you Adeline Thorne?" Hearing my name from someone I didn't know made my stomach dip. "Yes," I said, cautious. "Why?" His hand came off the counter and settled over my wrist. Not violent, not exactly, but firm enough to stop me from moving. Skin to skin. A boundary crossed like it didn't matter. "I shouldn't," he muttered, and then he leaned in close, his breath carrying the smell of coffee and winter mints. "But you need to hear this. It's about your son. About his wife's family." I stiffened. "My son." His voice dropped lower. "They come here all the time," he whispered. "Spending like they're made of money. Imported meats. Fancy wine. Designer stuff. Cash. Then they brag that your boy sends them money every month." The words hit me with a force that didn't make sense at first. They didn't land in my mind as meaning. They landed in my body. In my chest. In my hands. My throat went tight, like I'd swallowed something too big. "You've got the wrong people," I tried to say, but my voice sounded weak, like it had to travel too far to reach the air. "They're struggling. They've told us." "They tell everyone that," he cut in, still whispering. His eyes were bright with the kind of urgency you see in men who've kept quiet too long. "I watch you count coins for a cake. Then I watch Leonard Williams buy bottles that cost more than my electric bill. It isn't right." My son's in-law's name snapped into focus like a photograph developing. Leonard. A man with a friendly grin and a habit of sighing dramatically whenever money came up. Leonard, who always had a new story about a bill, a setback, a surprise expense. Leonard, who'd looked at me with polite eyes and said, "Times are tough, Adeline," as if it were a shared burden. My heart hammered so loudly I thought the people behind me would hear it. I wanted to pull my arm away, but my muscles didn't obey. My mind spun through excuses and explanations like a desperate wheel. Misunderstanding, exaggeration, mistaken identity, gossip. The cashier released my wrist and straightened up as if he'd never touched me. His face reset into neutral working man calm. He handed me my change and slid the receipt across the counter. "Take care, ma'am," he said in a normal tone, loud enough for the next customer to hear. Then he greeted the person behind me like nothing had happened. I took the receipt with fingers that shook. The cake box felt suddenly heavier, not because of the frosting inside but because of what I was carrying in my head. I didn't even remember walking away from the register. I moved through the store like a sleepwalker, passing displays of oranges and magazines without seeing them. Outside, the air hit my face cold and sharp. I should have gone straight to my son's car. He was waiting for me. Owen was always waiting for me, always patient, always trying to make life easier for his old mother. But my feet didn't turn toward the parking lot the way they were supposed to. They carried me around the side of the building, past stacked crates and a back door marked employees only. My breath came too fast. My pulse thudded in my ears. The cashier's words chased me like a swarm. They spend like they're made of money. They brag that your boy sends them money every month. I needed distance. I needed proof. I needed anything solid, anything I could hold, because the idea itself felt slippery and cruel. Behind the store, near the loading area, there were dumpsters lined up like dark teeth. The smell was awful, sour and stale, mixed with wet cardboard. I hated myself for stepping there, for crouching behind garbage like a criminal. But something older than pride drove me. The instinct that had kept my son alive when he was small and sick, the instinct that had made me work overtime shifts with a fever because rent didn't care about my health. From that spot, I had a clear view of the store's main entrance and part of the lot. Cars rolled in and out. People pushed carts. Life continued like it didn't know my world had tilted. My name is Adeline Thorne. I'm 67 years old. I live alone in a small downtown apartment with paint that peels in the corners and radiators that knock like old bones in winter. My pension covers the basics if I'm careful, and I've been careful for a long time. I can make a can of soup in the last 2 days. I can stitch a torn sleeve instead of replacing the shirt. I can pretend I don't notice when my shoes were thin at the heel. I wasn't always alone. I raised Owen after my husband died. I did it with tight budgeting, second-hand furniture, and the stubborn belief that love could fill the gaps money left behind. Owen grew into the kind of man people describe as good, the way they describe weather, reliable, gentle, steady. He worked hard. He worried about doing the right thing. He carried other people's problems like they were his duty. 3 years ago, he married Sienna. At first I told myself her distance was just personality. Not everyone hugs the way I do. Not everyone talks with their hands. Sienna smiled politely, kept her voice soft, and watched everything the way someone watches a room they're planning to redecorate. I tried to make her comfortable. I complimented her cooking even when the chicken was dry. I asked about her hobbies. I offered small gifts I couldn't afford. I told Owen, she's lovely, because I wanted his life to be peaceful. Sienna's family, especially her father Leonard, acted cordially. Leonard had a handshake that lingered just long enough to feel strategic. He called me Ms. Thorne until Owen corrected him, then switched to Adeline, as if it were intimacy earned. They spoke often about money, how difficult things were, how bills stacked up, how unfair the world could be. And every time they did, my son's shoulders tensed with the urge to fix it. He started sending them help. At first it was, just this once. A rent shortfall. A medical copay. A broken appliance. Then it became routine. Owen would come by my apartment looking tired and say, "Mom, they're in a bind again." And I'd watch the same boy who used to offer half his sandwich to a stray dog reach for his wallet like generosity was a reflex he couldn't turn off. Sometimes, when he looked especially worn, I'd slip him a little cash of my own. "For gas," I'd say. Or, "In case you need groceries." I never said, "I'm afraid you're being used," because fear is a seed that can grow into fights, and I didn't want to be the mother who made her son choose sides. Now, crouched behind dumpsters, I wondered if my silence had been protection, or cowardice. 2 minutes passed. Maybe less. The entrance doors slid open, and Leonard walked out. Not in a rush. Not with the hunched posture of a man beaten down by debt. He moved like someone who belonged wherever he stood. He carried bags, black with gold lettering, stiff paper that didn't wrinkle. Not the grocery store's plastic. Something upscale, The kind of shopping bag you see in window displays you don't enter. My mouth went dry. Leonard crossed the lot and stopped beside a car parked a few spaces away. It wasn't the old, barely running vehicle they always complained about. It looked new, clean lines, glossy paint, tires with deep tread. The afternoon sun slid across the hood like water. Leonard opened the trunk with a smooth click and placed the expensive bags inside carefully, like they held delicate things. Then he took out his phone and made a call, smiling at something the person on the other end said. His shoulders were loose. His gestures were unhurried. I pressed a hand to my chest as if I could hold my heart in place. This was wrong. This didn't match the stories. People who choose between rent and medication don't stroll out with luxury bags and climb into a new car. People who need just a little help until next month don't look like they've never worried a day in their lives. My mind dragged up memories like evidence in a courtroom. Sienna mentioning a cute little restaurant that sounded expensive, Leonard's special friend who always had deals, the way Sienna's nails always looked freshly done. I'd noticed those things and dismissed them because I wanted to believe the best. Leonard ended his call and glanced around the lot, eyes scanning. For a second, his gaze swept past the dumpsters, and I held my breath so hard it hurt. He didn't see me. Or he pretended he didn't. He turned and walked back toward the entrance. I stayed hidden, jaw clenched. If this was real, there would be more. There's always more. And there was. To my right, two elderly women pushed carts toward their cars, talking the way older women do, loud enough that the air carries their words. "I'm telling you, Hermione," one of them said, "that dress Sienna wore yesterday? I saw one just like it upstairs at the mall. $200, easy." The other woman made a sound that was half laugh, half scoff. "Oh, that's nothing. My granddaughter works at that fancy beauty place, the one with the French signs. She says Sienna comes in all the time. Buys creams like it's water." My stomach twisted. I knew there were other women in the world named Sienna. I knew coincidences happened. But something in my bones recognized the shape of truth forming. Hermione, or whoever she was, lowered her voice just a little, which somehow made it carry more. "And yet she's always telling people they're struggling. My friend knows someone at the bank, and says the deposits don't match the sob story." "Gossip," the other woman murmured, but her tone didn't sound like disbelief. "Still, that house isn't cheap. And delivery trucks come like clockwork. Who's broke with delivery trucks?" They walked on, their conversation breaking into smaller fragments. Parties. Decorations. Imported wine. The words landed like stones in my lap. I thought of the time Sienna had called me crying, voice trembling, saying Leonard needed medicine and they didn't know what to do. I'd taken money out of my emergency jar, money meant for my own worst day, and handed it over because the idea of someone suffering when I could help felt unbearable. Behind the dumpsters, the smell of rot filled my nose, and shame filled everything else. Leonard reappeared from the store entrance again, this time carrying a smaller bag. He moved toward his car, stopped to chat with a man nearby, then handed him something. Cash, I was almost certain. Bills. A casual donation, the way people tip when they don't need to count. My phone buzzed in my purse, startling me like a slap. A text from Owen. "Mom? Is everything okay?" I stared at the screen. For a second I imagined telling him right then, sending words into a message that would crack his life down the middle. But I didn't. Not yet. My thumbs typed a lie. Long line. Coming now. I slipped the phone away as Leonard climbed into his new car. The engine started with a quiet, confident purr. He backed out smoothly and drove off as if he had nowhere urgent to be and nothing heavy on his conscience. I remained still long after he left, staring at the empty space he'd occupied. The sun felt colder. The world felt sharper. When I finally stood, my knees protested. My dress smelled faintly like garbage. My hands were trembling, and my mind was already racing ahead to the moment I'd have to sit beside my son, look at his trusting face, and decide how to speak without destroying him. I stepped out from behind the dumpsters and walked toward the front lot, toward Owen, toward the life that had just become something else entirely. Owen was still exactly where he'd said he'd be, parked near the cart return, sitting in the driver's seat with both hands resting on the steering wheel as if he'd been holding himself in place. When he saw me, his face softened with relief, then tightened with concern as soon as I opened the passenger door. "Mom," he said, leaning across the console. "You're white as a sheet. Are you okay?" I slid into the seat carefully, as if sudden movements might spill the fear sloshing inside me. The cake box settled on my lap, and the crinkle of the receipt in my fingers sounded too loud. "I'm fine," I lied, forcing my voice to steady itself. The line was just long. Owen watched me for a moment, not entirely convinced. He had always been able to read me, even when he was small. When he was 6, he could tell if I'd had a bad day at work before I'd even taken off my coat. Now, as a grown man, he could still see the truth in the tiny hesitations I tried to hide. "Your hands are shaking," he murmured. "I'm just cold," I said quickly, and turned my face toward the windshield so he wouldn't see the panic there. "Let's go. We don't want to be late." He hesitated, then nodded and shifted the car into drive. The tires rolled forward, and the grocery store fell behind us, but the cashier's whispered words stayed seated beside me like an unwanted passenger. We drove through streets that should have felt familiar. I'd been in this city most of my life. I knew the corners where the old bakery used to be, the alley where Owen once scraped his knee chasing a ball, the park benches where I'd cried quietly after my husband's funeral because I didn't want my son to see. But now the world looked different, as if someone had turned the contrast up too high. Everything was too bright, too sharp, too certain. Owen tried to fill the silence the way he always did when he sensed tension. He talked about his job, his boss, some minor office annoyance that usually would have made me laugh. I nodded in the right places, made the right sounds, but I was barely in the car with him. My mind was still behind the dumpsters, watching Leonard's new car gleam. I forced myself to breathe. I told myself I needed to act normal. If I let my fear spill now, it would pour into Owen's lap before I had something solid enough to hold it up. "How's Leonard been doing?" I asked, keeping my tone casual, like I was making polite conversation. "Last I heard, Sienna said things were hard." Owen sighed the way a man sighs when he's already tired of a problem but feels obligated to carry it anyway. "Yeah," he said. "She says he had to cut back his hours. The company's struggling. That's why we've been helping more." There it was again. The story. The same smooth explanation that made Owen sound responsible, even noble. The same explanation that now felt like a rope he was proudly wrapping around his own wrists. "That must be stressful for you," I said, watching him from the corner of my eye. His jaw was clenched slightly, a line of tension at the base of his throat. He shrugged. "It is what it is. When you marry someone, you marry their family too. If they need help, you step up." He said it like a rule, like a lesson he'd carved into himself so he wouldn't question it. I looked at him, the son I'd raised alone, the son who had watched me sacrifice without complaint, the son who had learned generosity from seeing it every day. My heart broke in a quiet, steady way. He didn't know the difference between helping someone who's drowning and being used as a ladder by someone standing comfortably on dry ground. The neighborhood where Sienna's family lived came into view, and my stomach knotted tighter. The houses there were well kept, lawns trimmed, and paint clean. Not the kind of place where people were choosing between rent and food. Owen slowed as he searched for parking, and I studied the street like it might offer answers in the shape of mailboxes and porch lights. When we pulled up in front of Leonard's home, the first thing I noticed was the front door. It looked newer than I remembered, a solid piece of wood with hardware that caught the light. The windows had fresh curtains. The porch steps were clean. A wreath hung neatly, seasonal and tasteful. "The place looks nice," I said carefully. Owen smiled, a little proud, as if this was proof that the help he'd given had mattered. "Yeah. Leonard's been doing repairs on weekends. He's been working hard." Another explanation. Another neat little bow tied around something that didn't make sense. We walked up the path, Owen carrying a bag he'd brought, me holding the cake like it was a shield. Before we could knock, the door opened and Sienna appeared as if she'd been waiting right behind it. "Adeline," she sang out, stepping forward with a smile bright enough to fool strangers. And for a second, it almost fooled me too. Almost. Until my eyes took her in fully. Her dress was the kind of fabric that falls the right way, that doesn't wrinkle cheaply at the waist. Her shoes shone. Her handbag matched with deliberate precision, and her perfume wrapped around us in an expensive cloud that reminded me of department stores I never shopped in. Her hair wasn't just done. It was professionally shaped, the color carefully chosen, the kind of thing that costs money and time. "You look lovely," I managed, and even as the words left my mouth, I hated how normal they sounded, how polite, how blind. "Oh, this." She laughed lightly, glancing down at her dress as if it were nothing. "Old thing. I found it on clearance months ago. You know me. I love a good deal." The phrase hit like a nail being tapped into wood. Clearance. Deals. Sales. Always the same. Always the magic explanation. Owen kissed her cheek, and she turned her smile on him like sunlight, warm and practiced. Then she ushered us inside. The living room made my throat tighten. There was furniture I didn't remember seeing the last time. A leather sofa with clean seams. A glass coffee table that reflected the ceiling light like a mirror. Decorative pieces. Tasteful, modern, not cheap. On the wall hung a large flat-screen television, enormous and new-looking. I stood there too long, and Sienna's eyes flickered toward me as if she sensed the change. She didn't ask what I was thinking. She didn't need to. She just kept talking, filling the air the way a person fills a glass to the brim so no one notices what's missing. "Dad," she called, turning toward the hallway. "They're here." Leonard appeared with a towel in his hands like he'd been cooking. He wore the same friendly grin, the same welcoming posture, the same "I'm just a hard-working man doing his best" expression. If I hadn't seen him in the parking lot, I might have believed it. That fact alone, the possibility that I would have believed it, made me nauseous. "Adeline," he said warmly. "So good to see you. We've got a meal going that'll make you forget every worry." He hugged me lightly, the kind of hug that barely counts. His shirt looked crisp. His shoes looked expensive. His watch caught the light when he gestured toward the kitchen. I handed him the cake. "I brought something." "Oh, you didn't have to," Sienna cooed, but her eyes flicked to the box with a quick calculation. What kind of cake, what size, what it might say about my spending. "We just wanted you to feel welcome," Leonard said. "We're lucky you came." Lucky. The word tasted strange in my mouth. Luck had nothing to do with what I'd been doing for them. It had been sacrificed. It had been my son's extra hours. It had been my emergency jar. The kitchen counters were crowded with ingredients. Not the kind of ingredients I bought. There were glossy vegetables, expensive cuts of meat, bottles with labels that looked foreign. Everything about the spread said abundance. "Owen," Leonard said, clapping my son on the shoulder. "You've been working too hard. You look worn out." Owen laughed. Embarrassed. "Just busy." Sienna touched Owen's arm with a gentle gesture that would have looked loving to anyone else. To me now, it looked like a hand checking that the leash was still attached. We sat down to eat at a table set with plates that didn't match the old ones I remembered. The glasses were clear and heavy. The napkins were cloth. The food came out in waves, salads, sides, main dishes, and then more. It was enough to feed an entire family for days. Leonard poured a drink into the glasses like it was no big deal, like he didn't have to count the cost. The bottle looked familiar in the way expensive items do. You notice them in stores and then quickly look away. "This is delicious," I said, partly to test them, partly because my mouth needed to say something. "Is it special?" Leonard smiled. "Oh, you know. A friend of mine gets things at a discount. We couldn't afford it otherwise, but when a deal comes up." There it was again. The deal. The invisible friend. The miracle discount. I watched Owen as Leonard spoke. My son nodded along, relaxed, accepting, as if he'd heard it all before and had filed it neatly under reasonable explanations. Owen didn't look like a man who was suspicious. He looked like a man who was grateful to be able to help and grateful to believe it mattered. Sienna's phone vibrated again and again throughout the meal. Every time she checked it, a small pleased smile tugged at her mouth before she smoothed it away. When she caught me looking, she flipped her phone face down on the table like someone who'd just remembered she was being watched. "Everything okay?" I asked lightly. "Oh, just friends," she said quickly. "Planning something for next week." I nodded, but my mind latched onto the way she'd said it. Fast, clipped, like she'd practiced sounding casual. After lunch, Leonard offered to show me some improvements they'd made to the house. He led me through rooms that looked freshly painted, floors that gleamed, fixtures that looked new. The whole place felt like a quiet brag, dressed up as hospitality. In the master bedroom, I saw several shopping bags on top of a dresser. Thick paper, expensive logos. Some still folded neatly as if waiting to be unpacked. A tag peeked out from one bag, and the number on it made my stomach drop. "Oh," I said softly, gesturing toward the bags. "Shopping." Leonard's laugh came a little too quickly. "Oh, that. Sienna found some sales. You know how it is. Better to buy when it's cheap." Cheap. The word hovered between us like a joke. I looked at him, and for the first time, I thought, he's not even trying very hard. He doesn't think he has to. We returned to the living room where Owen and Sienna were talking. Owen looked up at me with a smile. "You okay, Mom?" "I'm fine," I lied again, and wondered how many lies were now living in this family like termites. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I glanced down, expecting Owen again. Instead, it was a number I didn't recognize. A message loaded, and my blood turned to ice. It was from the cashier. Attached was a photo, clear, sharp, of a grocery receipt. The total was over $400. The list included premium meats, imported items, specialty cheeses, and expensive bottles. The name printed near the top read, Leonard Williams. The date was 2 days ago. Under the photo, the cashier had typed, "Mrs. Thorne, I'm sorry, but you deserve to know. This is real." For a moment I couldn't breathe. My vision narrowed to the screen. It wasn't gossip now. It wasn't a hunch. It wasn't the smell of dumpsters and overheard chatter. It was proof. I slipped the phone back into my pocket quickly, forcing my face into something calm. Owen was watching me, and Sienna's eyes flicked toward my pocket in a way that made my skin prickle. "Mom?" Owen asked again, quieter. "What's wrong?" "Just tired," I said, and the lie felt like ash in my mouth. Sienna jumped in smoothly. "Oh, Adeline, you should have said something. Let me make you some tea. Or you can rest on the sofa." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. She wanted control back. She wanted me settled, quiet, and predictable. "I'm all right," I insisted. "Just a long day." Leonard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We're grateful you came," he said again, and the repetition sounded like a spell. For the rest of the visit, I moved like a woman walking across thin ice. I watched everything. I listened to every word. Each time someone said, sale, or discount, or extra work, it rang hollow. Each time Owen nodded along, my chest tightened with the ache of knowing I was going to have to hurt him. When we finally left, Sienna hugged me again, perfume pressing into my coat. "Drive safe," she said, and I realized she was watching my face the way I'd watched hers. In the car, Owen started talking immediately, cheerful. "Wasn't that nice? They really put effort in. You can tell they're trying." I stared out the window as the neighborhood slid away. My hands were locked together in my lap, fingers squeezing until my knuckles ached. "Yes," I said carefully. "They look very well." Owen chuckled. See? I told you. They're not bad people, Mom. They're just going through a rough patch. The receipt photo burned in my pocket like coal. I turned my head slowly to look at him. Owen, I said, keeping my voice gentle because I couldn't bear the idea of sounding like an enemy. Have you ever seen proof of what they tell you? The bills? The paperwork? Anything? His smile faded just a little. Mom. I'm not trying to accuse anyone, I continued quickly, because his tone warned me. I'm just asking. Because today, some things didn't add up. Owen's hands tightened on the steering wheel. They've explained it. Leonard's working extra. Sienna finds deals. They've had some help from friends. Friends. Deals. Extra work. The exact same phrases, delivered from my son's mouth now, as if he'd memorized them through repetition. I swallowed hard. If they're struggling, why do they have so many new things? His eyes flicked toward me, defensive now. Mom, you don't know everything. Things aren't always what they seem. The words hurt because they were true in a way Owen didn't understand. Things weren't what they seemed, but not in the direction he thought. I didn't push further. Not then. I could feel him closing, the way a door closes softly before it locks. If I forced it open now, I might shatter something I couldn't repair. So I held my tongue all the way back to my apartment, biting down on the urge to spill everything. Owen walked me to my door, kissed my cheek, and left with a goodbye that felt cooler than usual, as if my questions had already planted a discomfort he didn't want to face. That night, alone in my small living room, I sat in my armchair with the lamp on and the receipt photo open on my phone again. $400. 2 days ago. Premium items. The name is clear as day. I stared until the screen dimmed and went dark, then tapped it awake again, because part of me still wanted it to change into something innocent. It didn't. I sipped tea that tasted like nothing. My thoughts moved in circles. Tell him now, wait, gather more, don't make him choose, don't let them keep using him, don't let your silence become permission. In the quiet, I realized something that made my stomach sink even deeper. Owen didn't just believe them. He needed to believe them. Because if they were lying, then he wasn't just generous. He was being played. And the pain of admitting that might be worse than the pain of losing money. I opened my phone again and typed a message to the cashier's number, hands trembling. Thank you. Please, if you have anything else that proves it, send it. I need to protect my son. The reply came a minute later. I will. I'm sorry you're going through this. I set the phone down and leaned back, feeling older than my years. My apartment was quiet except for the radiators knocking and the faint hum of the fridge. I thought about my savings jar in the kitchen cabinet, about the coins I'd counted that morning, about the cake I'd bought to make a good impression on people who might have been laughing at my sacrifice. Then I thought about Owen's face, the way it softened when he spoke about duty and family. I thought about how hard he'd worked, how he'd skipped comforts to send money to people who were drinking expensive bottles and filling expensive bags. My hands curled into fists on the armrests. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to scream or storm into their house with accusations. That kind of confrontation would only give Sienna a chance to turn the story against me and pull Owen closer to her. No. If I was going to do this, I had to do it with facts so heavy they couldn't be brushed aside. I made myself a plan the way I used to make plans when Owen was small and the rent was due and the fridge was nearly empty. Quietly. Carefully. One step at a time. I would collect proof. I would protect my son. And when the moment came, when the evidence was clear enough that even Owen's need to believe couldn't erase it, I would tell him the truth, even if it cracked his world. Because I'd learned something in the hardest years of my life. Sometimes love isn't gentle. Sometimes love is the hand that pulls someone away from a cliff, even if the grip bruises. The days that followed passed with a strange double rhythm. On the surface, life continued as it always had. I woke early, made weak coffee, listened to the radio while folding laundry, and walked to the small pharmacy down the street for my prescriptions. But underneath those ordinary movements, something else was happening. An undercurrent of watchfulness, a sharpening of attention I hadn't felt in years. Every sound from my phone made my heart jump. The cashier, Eli, as I'd learned his name was, kept his word. 2 days after our exchange, another message arrived. This time it included 2 photographs. Both were receipts, both recent, both unmistakable. One totaled over $600. I stared at the list of items: imported seafood, specialty cheeses, luxury desserts, bottles of champagne with prices that made my stomach churn. The date on that receipt aligned perfectly with a memory I hadn't wanted to examine too closely. Sienna calling Owen late that night, crying about rent, saying they were short and desperate. I sat at my kitchen table, the photos glowing on my phone, and felt something inside me finally harden. Not anger, not yet, but resolve. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor communication or pride preventing honesty. This was a pattern, repeated and refined. Another message followed later that week, this one not from Eli but from an unfamiliar number. It was Hermione, the woman I'd overheard in the parking lot. She introduced herself politely and explained how she'd gotten my contact information through a neighbor who knew us both. I hesitated to reach out, she wrote, but after what I've seen and heard, I believe you deserve to know the truth. We spoke on the phone that afternoon. Hermione's voice was steady, factual, not gossipy. She told me about parties at Leonard's house, events catered by companies I'd only seen advertised in magazines. She told me about delivery trucks arriving weekly with furniture, appliances, clothing. She told me about conversations she'd overheard at the salon, at the market, at church gatherings where Sienna's family casually mentioned expenses that didn't fit their supposed hardship. They live well, Adeline, Hermione said gently. Very well. And people talk because the story they tell your son doesn't match what everyone else sees. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. The evidence was stacking itself neatly, piece by piece, and with each new confirmation, the weight on my chest shifted from confusion to something heavier, grief. Not for the money. Not even for the betrayal. For my son. I watched Owen closely after that. When he came by my apartment, I noticed the deeper shadows under his eyes, the way he rubbed the bridge of his nose when his phone buzzed with Sienna's name. I noticed how often he mentioned overtime, how carefully he talked around finances, as if saying the numbers out loud might make them worse. One evening, he arrived later than usual, shoulders slumped, exhaustion written into every movement. They need help again, he said quietly as he sat across from me. Another medical thing. $200 by Friday. That was the moment. Not because of the amount, but because of the timing. That same morning, Eli had sent me another receipt, this one documenting a purchase of luxury champagne and gourmet items made less than 24 hours earlier. I reached across the table and placed my hand over Owen's. His skin felt tense, overworked. Owen, I said softly, I need to show you something. And before I do, I need you to know that I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing it because I love you. He frowned, wary but attentive. I took a breath, then unlocked my phone and handed it to him. I didn't speak while he scrolled. I watched his face instead. At first there was confusion. Then disbelief. His brows drew together, his mouth tightening as he checked the dates, the totals, the names. When he looked up at me, his eyes were searching, almost pleading. Where did you get these? He asked. I told him everything. The cashier. The parking lot. The neighbors. I spoke slowly, carefully, laying each piece down like evidence on a table. I didn't accuse. I didn't raise my voice. I let the facts speak. But there has to be an explanation, he said weakly, even as his grip on the phone tightened. Maybe they had a good month. Maybe. Owen, I interrupted gently. These purchases were made on the same days Sienna asked you for help. That's not coincidence. Silence stretched between us. He stood up and began pacing my small living room, running his hands through his hair, shaking his head as if trying to dislodge the reality settling in. Why would she do this? he whispered. Why would her family lie? I didn't answer right away. When I did, my voice was quiet but firm. Because it worked. He stopped pacing. The realization hit him slowly, painfully, like something sinking beneath the skin. I could see memories rearranging themselves behind his eyes. Past conversations, justifications he'd accepted, doubts he'd ignored. How much have I given them? He asked, his voice barely audible. By your own estimates, I said. At least 5,000. Probably more. He sank back into the chair, elbows on his knees, face in his hands. I need to talk to her, he said finally. That night, Owen went home determined, no longer avoiding the truth. Before confronting Sienna, he did something he'd never done in their marriage. He looked. Through drawers. Through bags. Through spaces he'd trusted blindly. What he found shattered what little denial remained. Hidden shopping bags filled the closet. Receipts tucked between folded clothes. Jewelry still bearing tags. And then, worst of all, a small notebook in Sienna's purse. In it, she documented every request for money. Every lie. Every emergency. Notes about what worked, what phrasing made Owen cave fastest, what emotional pressure to apply if he hesitated. It wasn't desperation. It was strategy. When Owen confronted her, she denied it at first. Then she accused him of mistrust. Then she blamed me. Finally, when faced with the receipts and her own handwriting, she admitted the truth with chilling honesty. We were never really struggling, she said. It was just easier this way. Leonard admitted it too when Owen called it business, as if exploiting family were a transaction without consequence. By morning, Owen's marriage was over. The weeks that followed were brutal, but necessary. Divorce proceedings revealed even more hidden assets, more deception, more careful planning. The full amount they'd taken was closer to $15,000. It took time for Owen to recover, not just financially, but emotionally. Trust once broken doesn't mend quickly. But slowly, with support and honesty, he rebuilt. He learned to ask questions, to verify, to balance generosity with wisdom. And eventually, he learned to forgive himself. 2 years have passed now. Owen has remarried, a woman named Regina, honest, transparent, kind. She respects boundaries. She works for what she has. She never once asked for help she didn't truly need. And I, Adeline Thorne, sit now in my familiar armchair, tea cooling beside me, listening to the sound of real laughter coming from the kitchen. Sometimes I think back to that moment behind the dumpsters, to the smell of garbage and the shock of truth. It wasn't dignified. It wasn't noble. But it was brave. And it saved my son. Because love doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it stands still, watches carefully, and acts when silence would become betrayal. 2 years have passed since that afternoon at the grocery store, and time has softened the sharpest edges of what happened without erasing its meaning. I still remember it clearly, the cold air, the fluorescent lights, the sound of the scanner beeping as if nothing in the world were wrong. But now those memories no longer live in my chest like open wounds. They sit quietly, like old scars that remind you where you've been and why you walk more carefully now. Owen's life did not rebuild itself overnight. The end of his marriage was not clean or simple. There were legal papers, tense conversations, sleepless nights, and moments when he doubted his own judgment so deeply that he wondered whether he could ever trust anyone again. I watched my son wrestle with emotions no parent ever wants to see. Shame for having been deceived, anger at himself for ignoring doubts, grief for a marriage that had been built on lies rather than love. During those months, he leaned on me more than he ever had before. Sometimes he came over just to sit in silence, staring at the floor, his thoughts too heavy for words. Other times he talked endlessly, replaying conversations from the past, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when truth had given way to manipulation. I listened. That was all I could do. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say, "I told you so." I let him process his pain at his own pace, because healing isn't something that can be rushed without causing more harm. The financial truth was painful but manageable. Money, after all, can be earned again. What mattered more was the lesson Owen took from the experience. Slowly, he began to understand that his generosity had never been the problem. His kindness wasn't a flaw. The mistake had been offering trust without boundaries and help without verification. Learning that difference didn't make him colder. It made him wiser. I watched that wisdom take root in small ways. He started asking questions without apology. He stopped feeling guilty for saying no. When someone approached him with a story of hardship, he listened, but he also asked for details, documentation, confirmation. At first, he worried that this made him suspicious or unkind. Over time, he realized it made him safe. One evening, months after the divorce, Owen sat across from me at my kitchen table and said something I will never forget. He told me that he finally understood the difference between being generous and being exploited. Generosity, he said, comes from strength. Exploitation feeds on silence and fear of conflict. That realization marked the true beginning of his recovery. As for Sienna and her family, they faded out of our lives as quietly as they had once inserted themselves into it. There were a few final attempts at contact, apologies that felt rehearsed, promises that came too late, accusations meant to redirect blame, but none of them worked. Owen stood firm. I stood firm. The door closed, and this time it stayed closed. Life, as it always does, moves forward. Owen met Regina at work, a woman whose honesty was evident not because she announced it, but because she lived it. The first time she came to my apartment, she brought groceries and insisted we cook together. She spoke openly about what she could afford and what she couldn't. There were no dramatic stories, no subtle tests of generosity, no expectations disguised as vulnerability. It was such a contrast that it took me time to relax around her, to stop searching for hidden motives that simply weren't there. Regina respected the relationship between my son and me. She never tried to compete with it or control it. She treated me not as an obstacle, but as part of the family she was choosing to join. Watching her and Owen together, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not excitement fueled by illusion, but calm built on trust. When they married, it wasn't extravagant. It was thoughtful, honest, paid for within their means. I sat in the front row and felt a kind of peace I hadn't known I was missing. Not the loud joy of celebration, but the quiet certainty that this union was grounded in truth. Now, as I sit in my favorite armchair with my tea cooling beside me, I can hear Owen and Regina in the kitchen, laughing softly as they prepare dinner. That sound means more to me than any apology or repayment ever could. It is the sound of safety, of trust rebuilt the right way. I think often about how close I came to saying nothing. How easy it would have been to dismiss the cashier's words as none of my business, to walk away from discomfort and let my son's life continue on a path that would have drained him financially and emotionally. Silence would have been simpler. It would have spared me confrontation, doubt, and fear, at least for a while. But silence would have cost us far more in the end. I learned something in these last years that I wish I had understood sooner. Protecting the people we love sometimes means being willing to disturb their peace. Truth doesn't always arrive gently. Sometimes it comes wrapped in discomfort, embarrassment, and loss. But when it arrives, it clears space for something better to grow. At 69 years old, I don't pretend to know everything. But I know this much with certainty. Love that avoids truth isn't kindness, and generosity without boundaries is an invitation for harm. Real love watches carefully, listens deeply, and acts when the moment demands courage. That day at the grocery store changed our lives not because of what I heard, but because of what I chose to do with it. I chose to observe instead of dismiss, to gather truth instead of spreading accusations, to protect my son even when it meant risking his anger or misunderstanding. And I would make the same choice again. Because in the end, the most powerful justice isn't loud or vengeful. It is quiet, steady, and rooted in truth. It is the courage to stand still, see clearly, and refuse to let the people we love be diminished by lies. That is the lesson I carry with me now, one earned through pain, but kept with pride.